Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. I'm Natalie Mims-Frick, and today our Berkeley Lab team is going to be sharing some results from our new analysis on the cost of saving electricity and the cost of saving peak demand. Next slide, please. And we can go on to the one after that as well. So I'm going to start the webinar by discussing the cost of saving, why the cost of saving electricity matters, and provide some background on our cost of saving electricity and cost of saving peak demand analysis. Sean Murphy and Margaret Pigman will discuss our new cost of saving electricity analysis, including an updated composite curve of energy savings from efficiency programs and a new time trend analysis that covers 9 years of data from 2010 through 2018. After that, Chandler Miller will present the results from our updated program administrator cost of saving peak demand analysis, which also includes a composite curve of energy savings, demand savings, and a new time trend from 5 years of data from 2014 to 2018. And then Sean's gonna wrap us up with key findings, and we'll move on to moderated questions and answers. So please use the Q&A box at any time that you would like to ask a question, and we will answer that in our at the end of our session. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I want to note that we are recording the webinar and we will be posting it to the website. Everyone is in listen-only mode, so the only way that you're going to be able to communicate with us is through the Q&A box. And you could submit questions or comments to us through that. And we'll be answering our questions at the end of the presentation. And then I'll put the link to the slides into the chat box or the Q&A box as soon as I finish my portion of the presentation. And then that link also has them, that's where the recording and the slides will be. We can go on to the next slide, please. So our lineup today consists of 4 members of the efficiency team at Berkeley Lab's Electricity Markets and Policy Department. Sean Murphy is a scientific engineering associate, and his research focuses on utility administered efficiency programs and efficiency financing. Prior to joining the lab, Sean studied the urban PV potential in India as a visiting researcher and worked on efficiency policy and evaluation at National Grid. Chandler Miller is a program manager, and his research focuses on efficiency and distributed energy resources. Prior to joining the lab, Chandler held roles with Innovation Partners and DNBGL as a consultant, where he supported energy storage and other DER projects for utilities, independent power producers, and investors in design, evaluation, and implementation stages. Margaret Pigman is a scientific engineering associate. Her research focuses on the time-sensitive value of efficiency, end-use load profiles, and other efficiency issues. Prior to joining the lab, she was a technical consultant at Resource Refocus, specializing in data analysis and building energy modeling for energy efficient, zero net energy, and low carbon projects. Last but not least is me. I'm Natalie Frick. I'm a program manager at the lab and work on lots of different topics, including this analysis, end-use load profile research, time and locational value of efficiency and other DERs, and grid interactive efficient buildings and demand flexibility. We can go on to the next slide. So there's several reasons why the cost of saving electricity and the cost of saving peak demand are important. I'll start by talking about the blue and the gray boxes that are on the left side of the slide that provide the metrics that we're going to use in our analysis, and you'll hear these throughout our presentation. The program administrator cost of saving electricity is the utility or program administrator cost divided by the lifetime savings of an efficiency program and is expressed in dollars per kilowatt hour. The program administrator cost of saving peak demand is similarly the utility or program administrator cost divided by the lifetime demand savings of an efficiency program and is expressed in dollars per kilowatt. And our speakers after this will talk more about those as well. It's important to note that these values cannot be combined. They're separate metrics that use the same set of program costs, but with a different denominator, either kilowatt hours or kilowatts. So cost of saving electricity and peak demand are important because efficiency can be used to reduce annual energy consumption and peak demand for electric power systems. And these metrics can be used in resource adequacy planning to ensure electric system reliability at an affordable cost. They can also be used to benchmark utility program results as an initial screen for metering future demand and to assess how program cost performance changes over time with funding level and participation. Can go on to the next slide. Berkeley Lab has a long history of working on the cost of saving electricity and peak demand. This slide shows some of our select reports that we've published over the years, starting on the left in 2013 with our efficiency program typology. In 2014, we published our first program administrator cost of saving electricity. And in 2015, the total cost of saving electricity. In 2018, we updated our 2014 study. And in 2019, we published our first cost of saving peak demand report. In 2020, we published on the cost of saving natural gas and the cost of saving electricity for public power utilities. And we also added on to our 2019 peak demand analysis. And then the last link is this presentation. We have updated cost of saving electricity and peak demand, and we're building on our prior analyses. And then if the link that's in the bottom left corner of these slides has many more reports on cost of saving electricity besides these. And we can go on to the next slide. So our analysis today is based on 9 years of data for cost of saving electricity and 5 years of data for cost of saving peak demand. Each time we talk about a different aspect of our analysis, we'll show this map to indicate what states and years of analysis we're talking about. So you'll see a similar slide to this a few more times. So for this project, we collected data from 67 program administrators in 21 states. And those are the states that are in gray on the map on the right side of the slide. And in 2018, this data represented 92% of efficiency spending, 84% of demand reductions, and 90% of efficiency savings. As I mentioned, our cost of saving electricity analysis is from 2010 to 2018, and our peak demand is from 2014 to 2018. We can go on to the next slide, and I'm going to hand over the microphone to Sean Murphy, and he's going to talk about our cost of saving electricity analysis.
Thanks, Natalie, and hello, everyone. All right, if you move to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. So as Natalie mentioned, the primary metric for our analysis of the cost of saved energy is the program administrator cost of saved electricity. In customer-funded efficiency programs, both the program administrators and participants can bear costs. So here we're just looking at the costs from the program administrator's perspective. So that includes customer incentives, program administration, marketing, and evaluation costs, but we do exclude performance incentive costs. The metric is levelized in the sense that it amortizes the costs over the lifetime of savings and then discounts those costs to the year of investment. We also calculate the program administrator cost of saved electricity at the sector and regional level. So it's not just a sort of program level calculation. And when we do this analysis at the sector or regional level, we calculate the cost of saved electricity for all programs in that sector or region. So it's not, you'll see some numbers that are at the sector or regional level, and it's not an average of individual programs. It's considering the resource sort of within that category, within that region, within that sector. So it's not a simple average. To the right, on the right side of this slide, you'll see the sort of calculation itself of the cost of saved electricity. It's basically the first year cost of saved electricity, which is costs divided by annual savings, dollars per kWh, multiplied by a capital recovery factor. It's in that capital recovery factor where the discount rates and lifetimes come into play and the amortization calculation occurs. So in this analysis, we use a discount rate of 6%, which is consistent with utility weighted average cost of capital. Next slide, please. So here we take a look at how reported annual savings, lifetime savings, and annual spending break down across market sectors between 2010 to 2018, just to kind of give a high level sense of the composition of these efficiency portfolios. The values here represent the share of overall savings and spending over that period. We find that commercial and industrial, C&I, accounts for more than half of annual savings, lifetime savings, and spending. The residential sector provides a somewhat smaller share of savings and spending, but that share is still much larger than that of either the low-income or cross-cutting programs. Interestingly, there are some differences in the share of annual and lifetime savings between sectors. C&I, for example, accounts for a slightly larger share of lifetime savings than annual savings, and then the opposite case is true for residential. And this reflects differences in the average lifetimes in those market sectors. So the C&I lifetime is about 13 years, and the residential lifetime is about 9 years. We also find that the share of spending associated with low-income programs at 8% is 4 times larger than that sector's share of annual savings at 2%. And this reflects the overall higher per kWh costs of low-income programs. Program administrators often provide full incentives for these programs, which results in higher program administrator costs and lower participant costs. Next slide, please. So next, we're going to take a look at the program administrator cost of saved electricity overall and across market sectors and regions. We're taking a look at both at this 9-year period of our analysis, 2010 to 2018, and also showing just the most recent year, 2018. And that's partly to give a sense of how things have been and where they are most recently before we dive into our more detailed time trend analysis in a little bit. One thing I want to note here is that the total line includes cross-cutting programs, which we don't break out separately. So if anyone is adding up the sample sizes, just note that the total is slightly larger than the residential, C&I, and low income. We find that the average cost to utilities to save a kilowatt hour was less than 3 cents between 2010 and 2018. And in 2018, it was only 2.4 cents. The program administrator cost of electricity, however, does vary by market sector. C&I programs are the least costly at 2.3 cents per kWh between 2010 and 2018. And in 2018, that cost was actually lower at 2 cents per kWh. The residential sector costs are slightly higher than the C&I ones, but they're still under 3 cents per kWh, both over that whole period, 2010 to 2018, and in 2018 alone. Low-income costs, however, are a good deal higher at 9 cents per kWh. Importantly, we see that the 2018 costs are lower or only slightly higher than the 2010 to 2018 costs, which is suggesting that there's some stability to the program administrator cost of saved electricity over time. As I mentioned, we'll get into the time trends at a sector level and portfolio level a little bit later on. We do find some variation across regions. The Midwest has the lowest program administrator cost of saved electricity over our 9-year period, and the Northeast has the highest, though the South and the West are quite similar, not too far off. Interestingly, the 2018 levelized cost of saved electricity in the West is much lower than that for that 2010 to 2018 period, and this is largely due to the growth of codes and standards programs in California, which have increased in scale and are quite low cost. Next slide, please. So now we turn to some state level results. Here we present the program administrator cost of saved electricity on the vertical axis against the reported savings as a share of retail sales in 2018. Now, this share of retail sales you can think of as a measure of sort of the scale of the programs within the utility jurisdictions where they operate. We don't have data on every program administrator in each state, so the savings as a percent of sales value only includes the savings in sales for the program administrators in our data set. So if we don't have savings for a given utility, we're going to exclude its sales when calculating the savings as a percent of sales in the state where it operates. We find that 2/3, that's 14 of the 21 states that we collected data on, reported savings that were above 1% of their retail sales in 2018. In 8 states, we find that those savings are above 1.5% of retail sales. So certainly some pretty high scale programs in the mix here. In these states, the high level of savings were also achieved without significant increases in the cost of saved electricity. We also see that there is some relationship between the cost of saved electricity and the scale of the programs by regions, with some grouping of states in the South at the lower scale programs and slightly higher costs. Next slide, please. So here we show a composite cost curve for electricity savings from programs in the states that we analyzed between 2010 and 2018. This curve relates the cost of various types of efficiency programs to their share of the efficiency resource at a national level. So on the x-axis, we have different program types arrayed in order of ascending levelized cost of electricity, which we show on the y-axis. So the programs at the far right those have the highest cost of saved electricity, which we're measuring on the vertical axis. The width of each bar is scaled to represent the lifetime savings of that program. The values at the top of each bar show the percentage of the total lifetime savings for all programs implemented during the study period for which the program administrators claim savings. So the wider the bar, the larger the resource that the program represents in terms of lifetime savings. The bars that are in the blue-green tones are residential, and those in the green-tan are commercial. And then the orange is low income, and gray is cross-cutting. Programs that are aimed at supporting more stringent building energy codes for the least cost efficiency resource, but these programs are only offered in a few states. Residential lighting provided almost 3 times more lifetime savings nationally, at about 15% of total savings at the next lowest cost. Moving up the cost curve, the next least cost programs are all commercial, including both prescriptive rebates and some custom programs. Together, this block of commercial programs represents almost half of total lifetime savings. Interestingly, within the residential sector, we do find some differences. So on the left side of the curve are low cost, high saving lighting programs. On the right side are some higher cost programs aimed at various end uses, including some more comprehensive multi-measure programs. This range in cost performance is largely a reflection of differences in program delivery and measure mix. Whole home retrofits accounted for about 3% of lifetime savings, but these projects are more comprehensive in scope, often include heating and air conditioning replacements, and in cold climates, they can include air sealing and insulation. An important thing to consider here is that these programs also save heating fuel in addition to electricity. So while the cost of saved electricity can be high for these programs, cost effectiveness tests would include fuel reduction benefits and non-energy impacts, such as thermal comfort. Among other programs at the high end of the cost curve are residential behavioral feedback programs, which accounted for less than 1% of lifetime savings. If we were just looking at percent of annual savings, that value would be slightly higher. Most PAs, though, program administrators do assume a lifetime for these programs about 1 year, but that's not strictly true. There are some that assume a lifetime for behavioral programs above 1 year. We also found that the size of these programs has been increasing in recent years, while the costs have not increased as much. So these programs are kind of coming to scale with certain economies of scale, with the savings increasing without the costs increasing as much. And finally, we see that the low-income programs accounted for about 2.2% of savings. Program administrators do, as I mentioned earlier, do typically pay the full cost of measures for these programs and often incur costs to address issues related to poor condition of older homes and health and safety issues that can include asbestos removal or old wiring before the efficiency measures can even be installed. Low-income programs also have aims beyond energy savings, such as lowering energy bills, improved health and safety of occupants, and better comfort. So in the decision about the high cost of these programs is not just a reflection of what they can provide to customers. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Margaret to talk about our time trend analysis.
Thanks, Sean. So for the cost of saving electricity time trend analysis, we calculated the program administered cost of saving electricity for each program in each year. Because it's the same kind of levelized cost that Sean described, the costs are spread out over the measure's lifetime. To allow comparison over time, we're only looking at the program administrators that we have data for each year between 2010 and 2018. Out of the 67 program administrators that we studied for the 2018 period, 38 of them have data for all of the 9 years from 2010 to 2018, and therefore are used in this cost of saving electricity time trend analysis that I'm going to talk about. Those 38 program administrators are found in the 13 states that are shaded on this map. So this set of box plots shows the distribution of cost of saving electricity for the programs that were offered in each year. For box plots, the top and the bottom of the box represent the 75th and 25th percentiles, which means that half of the data are contained in that box. The bolded horizontal line in the middle is the median, and the red dots are the average cost of saving electricity weighted by the lifetime savings of the program. So this chart includes the programs from all program categories. And because the program administrators don't offer the same programs every year, the total number of programs varies from 489 to 559, around 500. The cost of saving electricity was pretty stable over the analysis period with no clear directionality in the changes. The weighted average ranged from 2.4 to 3.1 cents per kilowatt hour, with the lowest values being in 2017 and 2018. In every year, the weighted averages are less than the medians, which indicates that the programs with the most lifetime savings tend to be less expensive, and the more expensive programs tended to be smaller. This set of box plots shows only the residential programs. And so the sample size is much smaller, between 163 and 214 programs per year. As we saw on the cost curve that Sean discussed, there was a wide range in the cost of the saving electricity for the residential programs. However, the higher cost programs tended to be relatively small because once again, the weighted average is well below the median. And overall, the weighted means varied between 2.1 and 3.4 cents per kilowatt hour, and there wasn't a clear trend over time. Next, we have the equivalent set of box plots, but for the low-income programs. Notice that the scale on the y-axis is different from the last two plots. It goes to a maximum of 45 cents a kilowatt hour instead of 25 cents a kilowatt hour. The weighted average costs of saving electricity are around 9 cents per kilowatt hour, but show more variation than the other sectors. However, because there were only about 50 programs per year, any year-to-year differences show up much more strongly than for the market rate residential programs. Finally, here are the commercial industrial programs. The scale has zoomed in again to be the same as the residential and overall programs. So the axis only goes back to 25 cents kilowatt hour. The commercial and industrial programs are about half of the total number of programs, so about 250 programs per year. Like with the other sectors, the cost of saving electricity was stable over time, varying from 2.2 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour. Unlike for the residential programs, there are a couple of instances where weighted averages are higher than the median, which indicates that some of the larger CNI programs were slightly more expensive than the median, that middle program. Overall, the cost of saving electricity was pretty stable for all sectors in our 2010 to 2018 analysis period. So now I'll pass it to Chandler to talk about the cost of saving peak demand.
Thanks, Margaret. So like the cost of saved energy, we calculate the cost of saving peak demand from the perspective of the program administrator using a levelized cost. The calculation method is similar, where we apply a cost recovery factor based on the discount rate and estimated program lifetime. The difference is that the CSPD is based on first year annual gross peak demand savings instead of annual electricity savings. Like the cost of saved electricity, we also calculate program category and sector level CSPD using a savings weighted lifetime for all aggregated programs, not an average of individual program CSPD values. Next slide. So we collected peak demand data for a total of 67 program administrators in 21 states for the collection period of 2014 to 2018. This covers 92% of reported efficiency spending and 84% of reported demand reductions. This calculation is based on data reported by independently operated utilities in EIA's Form 861 to calculate that value. So these are the same states that we had in the cost of saved electricity slide, but in this section, I'll also present analysis that compares the 4 different regions, which is shown by the color code on the map. Next slide. So here we show the percentage of peak demand savings by sector for each region's portfolio. Within each region, we separate savings into 4 sectors: cross-cutting in orange, low income in gray, residential in yellow, and C&I in blue. The cross-cutting programs apply to all market sectors, and these include multi-sector rebates, codes and standards, education, outreach, workforce development, and R&D. And you'll see this come up more in some of our later slides. And we find that the C&I sector provided 57% of peak demand savings across all our programs in our 2014 to 2018 study period, but results varied by region. So C&I provided the majority of savings in the Midwest and the Northeast, while residential provided the majority of savings in the South. Cross-cutting represented 28% of savings in the West, which is significantly more than other regions. And this is largely from codes and standards programs. Next slide. This shows the comparison of the cost of saving peak demand while low for all collection years and just 2018 by sector and program. For the most part, the CSPD is lower for 2018 compared to all collection years. However, the Northeast is the only case where the CSPD is larger in 2018. And compared to other individual years, the Northeast CSPD is actually similar to its 2016 and 2014 values, but higher than 2015 and 2017. C&I and residential have similar CSPDs, while low income is higher, which is an expected result. Some other things that you can note from here is that generally, the Northeast cost of saved peak demand is comparatively higher than the other regions, since the 2 highest state CSPDs are in Massachusetts and Maryland, where New York is also the 4th highest, which leads to a higher CSPD in the Northeast. Meanwhile, in the West, Oregon and California were the 3rd and 5th highest state CSPD, which drives up the West CSPD value. And the total sample size by region compared to other sectors, compared to the sector sample size, are not equal since cross-cutting programs were not shown here. Next slide. So here we show the cost of saving peak demand as a percent of retail sales in 2018. We see that 17 states reported a CSPD of less than $200 per kilowatt. And of the 4 states with a CSPD above $200 per kilowatt, 3 of them reported greater than 1.5% of electricity savings as a percent of retail sales. And while not all states follow this trend, we see that generally states with a higher CSPD also achieve a greater relative electricity savings. Next slide. So this slide is a distribution of peak demand and electricity savings by cost of saving peak demand bin and market sector. So this updated chart shows the aggregate peak demand and energy savings over the study period, segmented into CSPD cost bins. Individual program years from 2014, individual program years from 2014 to 2018 are sorted into levelized CSPD bins, shown in the x-axis by sector, which is cross-cutting, low-income, residential, and C&I. For each bin, the total aggregate portfolio demand savings are plotted on the primary y-axis, where program years with a levelized CSPD equal or lesser than the value on the x-axis are included. The aggregate electricity savings for all sectors are plotted on the secondary y-axis. From this, we see that the largest increase in both demand and electricity savings occurs from $100 per kilowatt to $200 per kilowatt compared to other ranges. Half of all program demand savings are available at a CSPD of less than $100 per kilowatt, and 80% of all program demand savings are available Excuse me. Sorry, excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. 80% of all demand savings are available at a CSPD of less than $200 per kilowatt. In comparison, 40% of all electricity savings are available at a CSPD of less than $100 per kilowatt, and 75% of all electricity savings are available at a CSPD of less than $200 per kilowatt. Overall, electricity savings have a similar distribution to demand savings, where the percentage of aggregate electricity savings in each cost bin is 10% or less than demand savings. Next slide. Sorry, I need to...
I'll chime in here and say that Chandler is very sick today, and he loves efficiency so much that he is being a team player and presenting his slides. So we really appreciate that. And I hope that you get enough water in to finish up your presentation.
Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, we are almost done. And I just really wanted to show you these cost curves that I made. So I'll talk about these and 2 more slides. So this slide shows the levelized CSPD cost curve, which is similar to the cost of energy cost curve, where here the x-axis is the peak demand savings as a percent of first-year portfolio savings by program over the course of the study period. And the y-axis is the cost of saving peak demand. The levelized cost of peak demand was calculated by grouping individual programs together and calculating a weighted program category lifetime. So here this shows that the other cross-cutting programs category has the highest CSPD, where codes and standards is the lowest. High CSPD programs in other cross-cutting are from programs such as marketing, education, outreach, workforce development, planning evaluation, and market transformation from utilities in California, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New York, and Louisiana. And the low codes and standards programs are from utilities in California and Arizona. We've also separated lighting from other residential consumer product rebates to show that lighting is below $100 per kilowatt, while the remainder of the category is above $200 per kilowatt. This also shows that all C&I categories are below $200 per kilowatt, besides the category for municipalities, universities, schools, hospitals, and government. Overall, the average levelized CSPD is $152 per kilowatt for all residential programs and $145 per kilowatt for all C&I programs, where residential contributed 6.15 gigawatts and C&I contributed 7.9 gigawatts to peak demand savings. These are higher than cross-cutting, which has an average levelized CSPD of $139 per kilowatt, which is somewhat counterintuitive, given that cross-cutting includes both codes and standards and the other cross-cutting categories. So the largest difference between this cost curve and the cost of saved electricity cost curve is residential behavior and education, where it makes up 8.9% of demand savings, but only 0.8% of electricity savings. It also has the 4th largest cost of saved electricity value, where it is a bit lower on the cost curve for CSPD. Next slide. Thanks. So for CSPD, we also performed a time trend analysis, as we did with cost of saved electricity. This time trend includes 59 program administrators in 19 states from 2014 to 2018. And once again, this is different from the full analysis because we only include program administrators with peak demand data for all 5 years. Next slide. This shows the comparison of levelized CSPD and sample size for all programs and those included in the time trend analysis. We see that the levelized CSPD is similar for most years, although it is notably lower for all programs compared to time trend in 2018. And furthermore, we also see that the sample sizes are similar, demonstrating that the time trend analysis represents the entire data set well. I'm going to hand it over to Sean now. Thanks for tolerating my coughing. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chandler. So I'm just going to summarize some of our key findings that we've covered so far in the presentation before we transition to question and answer. So our analysis covers the cost of saved electricity over 9 years between 2010 and 2018. In 2018, we found some strong evidence of the scale of these programs, with 2/3 or 14 of the 21 states that we collected data on achieving savings that were above 1% of retail sales. Between 2010 and 2018, we find that the program administrator cost of saved electricity has remained low and has been relatively stable. It's ranged between 2.4 and 2.8 cents per kWh. At the market sector level, we find that C&I programs provide the lowest cost resource at about 2 cents per kWh. C&I programs were slightly higher, or residential programs were slightly higher and closer to 3 cents per kilowatt hour, and low-income programs were a good deal higher at 9 cents per kilowatt hour. We showed a composite cost curve that demonstrates the scale of the efficiency resource available at low cost and from different program types. In our time trend analysis, we find that the program administrator cost of saving electricity was stable over time across all 3 major market sectors, and that in most cases, programs with the highest lifetime savings tended to have the lower cost of saving electricity. Next slide, please. In our analysis of cost of saved peak demand, we addressed 5 years, 2014 to 2018, again leveraging recent data collection from 21 states. Find that the program administrator cost of saved peak demand ranged from about $60 to $450 per kW over the study period, and actually decreased over those 5 years. Similar to the cost of saving electricity, C&I programs have the lowest cost of saving peak demand at $145 per kW, and the residential sector, however, was only slightly larger at $147 per kW. The cost of saved peak demand in the low-income sector was more than twice as high. So similar rankings within the sectors in terms of their costs. We find that 4 program types contributed more than 40% of the portfolio demand savings for this study period. Residential consumer products, which includes lighting programs, and then 3 C&I programs. The composite cost curve for peak demand demonstrates that there are similar relative costs of providing peak demand and energy savings. And finally, our time trend analysis shows that the program administrator cost of saving peak demand has declined over time. Next slide, please. So here I just want to talk a little bit about sort of the context of energy efficiency as a resource and how it relates to the performance of other technologies. And I think what we can say is that energy efficiency, or electric energy efficiency, is a low-cost resource that can compete with other technologies. So here we show a summary of the sector and regional program administrator cost of saved electricity values that we showed earlier in the presentation, and levelized costs of dispatchable and non-dispatchable technologies as reported by the EIA. And by dispatchable, I mean a technology that can adjust its performance in response to a signal from a grid operator. Across all regions in 2018, the levelized program administrator cost of saved electricity is lower than the levelized cost for wind, solar, hydro, fossil fuel generation, geothermal, biomass, and storage. Energy efficiency is a competitive low-cost resources. I think one thing we can find in our analysis. Next slide, please. And we also find that this trend holds for cost of saved peak demand reductions. Efficiency is a low-cost capacity resource, but this does require few important caveats because energy efficiency is generally a passive resource in that it's not dispatchable and does not provide the same services that other power generating technologies can, which can complicate comparisons. The addition of controls, however, can enable the active management of efficiency resources and provide the additional grid services that could make for more direct comparisons between the cost of saved peak demand and the level or the cost of demand capacity cost of other technologies. But I think the theme coming out of this is just that energy efficiency does provide a low cost energy and capacity resource. And with that, I'll turn things back to Natalie for our question and answer.
Thanks, Sean. We have lots of good questions coming in, and a lot of them are around the data that we use for this analysis. And so I'm going to give an overview of that, and then I'm going to let Sean chime in with anything else that he'd like to add. So all of the data that we use in this analysis is from filings that utilities or program administrators provide to their regulators. It's all publicly available information, usually through docketed proceedings. We're doing a program administrator cost, which means that we're collecting cost data on expenditures from planning, administration, design, and measurement and verification and implementation. So we're not looking at lost revenues, and we are looking at utility payments to customers. For the EIA data, the only EIA data that we're using in this analysis is to calculate the savings or demand as a percentage of sales. So savings as a percentage of sales, or demand as a percent of total savings. We're using the EIA data only for the program administrators that we collected data on to determine that value. I think that kind of rounds out most of the questions around data. Sean, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
One thing I could add is just on the sort of the deemed versus verified savings, which I think came up in one of the questions received. So as Natalie mentioned, the data we're analyzing are all reported by program administrators. So these are the data that we find in filings or we receive directly from them or utility commissioners. And the data that we make use of are kind of the common denominator that allows us to connect a broad set of the program administrators, typically are the gross reported savings. So these do not include often the most recent measurement and verification efforts. So we distinguish between these gross savings that we're analyzing and verified savings that include more measurement and verification. There is variation in how program administrators define these, which does present a challenge in assembling the data set. But I think we can understand these savings as not including, or these savings having more deemed savings and not including the most recent measurement and verification results.
Thanks, Sean. And Margaret, if you want to quit sharing, well, actually, before you quit sharing the slides, one of these questions is around comparing dollar per kW savings with cost for admin costs for new generation. So if you can go back a couple slides, this doesn't necessarily answer the exact question, but no, go forward one. This is a table, thank you. So this table on the right is an excerpt from an EIA table, and this is cost and performance characteristics of new generation. And obviously, efficiency doesn't provide the same services as power generating technologies, so it makes this comparison quite challenging. However, this is what the EIA is reporting as, I believe this is overnight costs for a variety of different resources. And as you can see, efficiency is quite a bit cheaper than any of those technologies. So that's the extent of analysis that we've done with a comparison between efficiency and other resources. Let's see. So there's a question in here. Chandler, I don't know if you're up for talking, but there's some questions around codes and standards and the peak demand analysis. And if you feel like talking, you can answer them. If not, I can do it. So it's up to you.
Yeah, I can chime in. Yeah, which question are you referring to?
So I think there's a couple questions around I think it'd be good to clarify what codes and standards means in this analysis versus just broad codes and standards. And then also the costs associated with codes and standards and the savings associated with codes and standards that we're reflecting in our analysis.
Yeah, so the codes and standards that we're referring to in here is any program administrator costs associated with codes and standards only. So not any other costs associated with that. And then the savings is the estimated electricity or peak demand savings also associated with those codes and standards. And really, when we look at codes and standards, the majority, greater than 90%, is coming from codes and standards programs in California and Arizona. And those are based on an annual basis. And it's the estimated savings from, I think, implementation of new codes and standards programs.
Thanks, Chandler. Sean, there's a question that came in about if we're going to convert our analysis to GHG. I thought that might be something you'd like to answer per our earlier conversations.
Sure, it's something that we've thought about, but I think we don't. It's not. I think we've thought through it, and I think of seeing that, like, if we're going to make this analysis, we have to probably look at the marginal emissions. And one challenge that we identified is that we don't always is knowing when energy efficiency savings occur is really important in knowing what the emissions impact will be. So I think that's one challenge in feeling really confident in making sort of emissions estimate for these programs. Although I think a reasonable estimate could be made by just using sort of the marginal emissions rate at a pretty aggregate level. It's something we had sort of thought through, but don't have immediate plans to conduct.
I think the other part of it is that we would need the end use load profiles to create annual savings, which I'm going to shamelessly plug one of my other projects. LBL is working with NREL on creating end use load profiles that are publicly available, that are representative of the residential and commercial building stock. They are modeled, but have been calibrated across several regions, and those will be available at the end of September. So if you want more information about that, I can put the link in the chat box. Sean, another question for you was around the discount rate. I think it was 6%, is that right?
Yeah, that's just right. It was, we used 6% in this analysis.
And then I'm seeing that we're getting several comments about how to compare efficiency with the cost of new generation. And I appreciate that feedback, that we need to include project costs, that we need to be levelizing the technology costs. I think those are both good, good comments, and that's something we can definitely think about. We will most likely be creating an updated slide deck that we'll repost. And so I should be able to do that and include better numbers. So that's good feedback from the audience. Thank you. Let's see. In terms of sharing publicly available data, we are hoping to create some data visualizations. I put one link to some of our older analysis that has data visualizations in it. We typically don't give out our full data set for this analysis, but we can point anyone to where the filings are, and certainly our aggregated results will have numbers that are available with them. Let's see, there was another comment here about the total cost as opposed to the program administrator costs. And unfortunately, we haven't had funding to do total cost analysis again, but our last round of analysis on the total cost of saving electricity, I think it was 2009 through 2015, and it was a subset of our full data set because not everyone reports that. And I believe that the costs were somewhere around, if residential was, 1 cent, then the for program administrator cost, then with the participant cost added in, it was around 2 cents. And some of the other factors weren't quite that large, going from 0.24 cents to 2.9 cents or something like that. And I can put that link in that has the information from the last time we did a total cost of saving electricity analysis. There's a question in here about how we define peak. And that is a fantastic question. That's something we struggle with. As with many of the other questions related to the data that we use for this analysis, we're using what the utilities are reporting. We are trying to take into account the duration of the peak periods, or what peak period means to people, but it's very challenging. And so what we're presenting is what is being reported as peak demand reductions by the administrator, and they may not be perfect. They are not perfect, without a doubt. They are not one-to-one comparisons across the board, but it is what people are reporting as their peak demand reductions from their programs. We have tried to dig into it a bit deeper, but it becomes very complex very quickly. So I think we would need to focus on some kind of state or regional analysis if we wanted to dig deeper into that. And I agree that the peak is shifting over time. We're going to see this as we start to collect more California data, given that they changed their efficiency peak period from midday to, I think, 4 to 9 p.m. Maybe last year. So we'll start seeing it in the data that we collect moving forward, how that shows up. So that might be something interesting to look into. Let's see. Just looking through all of these questions. While I look through them, Sean, do you want to talk about any of your program level analysis that we were able to do on cost of saving electricity?
Sure. Yeah, we have actually had a couple additional slides in case they were questions came up during the Q&A. So I think, yeah, this is the one. Just give me 1 sec. Yeah, so we were able to take a look at the sort of time trends in the program administrator cost to save electricity for some of the major residential and commercial program types. So first, here we have the overall residential sector on the left for the whole period 2010, or between 2010 and 2018. Actually, I think the years here are 2014 to 2018. And then a selection of the major programs: lighting, products, HVAC, whole home. And so what we can see is that there's general consistency at the sector level, and then there's been some movement within the program types over time. So we see an increase in the cost of new construction, but a reasonable decline in the cost of behavior programs, sort of mentioned earlier. There's also somewhat of an increase in HVAC programs as well. And then lighting is maybe a very slight decline, but overall quite stable in that period. If we move on to the next slide, we have a similar presentation of some of the major commercial program types. So C&I prescriptive, custom programs, new construction, small commercial, and then MUSH, which is the municipal, universities, schools, and housing, so sort of institutional, often public facilities. And similarly, we see that there is a consistency over this period, 2010 to 2018, in the C&I cost to save electricity. And then within the programs, there's some movement year over year, but overall things are relatively stable. Slight decline in the custom programs, and then somewhat of an increase in MUSH with a little bit more variability. And then, yeah, small commercial as well, sort of slight increase, but more interannual movement. So I think the main theme is just general consistency over time in the cost of these programs.
Thanks, Sean. There's a question that came through on cost recovery, and if the utilities are receiving cost recovery for the programs. And I think most utilities are, but they're also receiving cost recovery for all of their generation assets or most investments that they make if they're prudent. So that's a good point, but I think it's true for other resources as well. Margaret, we have a question that came in for you on one of the findings about programs with the highest lifetime savings, having a lower cost of saved energy. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
So the programs can have a long or a large lifetime savings if the measures that are involved have long lifetimes and a lot of savings, or if the program is just really large. And so in this case, I think that mostly the lifetime savings are coming from the fact that the programs are just really large, just because they tend to be the lowest cost of saving electricity programs. So the program administrators know that they can get a big bang up for their buck for things like residential lighting. And so they choose to make those programs large to maximize their savings within their constrained budgets.
Thanks, Margaret. Sean, I'm going to put you on the spot on this one. There's a question about ISO RTOs and the utilities, bidding efficiency, for example, into the market. And the question is wondering if our data from utilities that are receiving payments for their savings, if we collect data from those utilities, and then also if their cost of saving peak demand tends to be lower. And I think that probably the example that's a little bit clearer is ISO New England. So I don't know if you have any insights from Massachusetts or other New England states that you want to share. If not, then I can fill in as well.
Yeah, no, so the experience I had was in familiarity with some of the New England programs and how they receive funds from the forward capacity market. So just, backing up one step, when utilities can submit the efficiency as a capacity resource, at least most familiar with the ISO New England, they can receive payment through this forward capacity market. And I recall that I think the sort of the budget, in a sense, so the goals are set and then budget follows that. And then the forward capacity payments can maybe reduce the amount that's collected. So the overall cost of the efficiency resource doesn't change, but it may affect the amount that is collected through customer bills. So less of an impact on the program administrator cost to save electricity and more of an effect on the charge that appears on, the additional charge that is collected on customer bills.
Thanks, Sean. And then I think that we have time for maybe one or two more questions. There's one that came in on kind of what's going to happen in the future with programs, and commenting that lighting programs are cost effective, but there's only so much to displace. I was wondering if you have any thoughts that you want to share on where you see programs shifting to, or what we see in our data.
Yeah, so we first noticed that there was this increase in behavioral programs over time, and they're taking a larger share of portfolio savings. And I didn't see over that period, 2014 to 2018, didn't see a sort of corresponding decline in the share of lighting savings. I think that was sort of a hypothesis that I had, that maybe perhaps behavioral programs are replacing a decline in lighting savings. But at least when we observed from these gross reported savings, that the share of lighting savings was still relatively stable in that 2014 to 2018 period.
Thanks, Sean. And you got the last word. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. As we said, the recording will be available. We had a few questions that we did not get to, and I will follow up with folks. I should have everyone's emails from the registration list, and we can circle back and give you some answers on any of your questions. And I may ping a few of you about your comments on our analysis of KW and generation. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great afternoon.